Hello and welcome again to another episode of This Week in Christian History. And this week of our episode here at the end of October is one of those big days in Christian history that are pretty big tipping points. And it's all about Martin Luther nailing the 95 Theses on the castle door in Wittenberg. We have to say Wittenberg, right? Not Wittenberg for all of our German friends, right? We have to say it in the right way. Professor Alec Ryrie is with me here. He is a professor of Christian history at Durham University over in the UK. And thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Yeah. So on a scale of 1 to 10, right? 10, but not a golf score, although I know you're close to Scotland, so maybe we ought to talk golf, right? But a non-golf score, 10 being the highest. The event that we're talking about today is got to be at least getting a 9.5, if not a full 10, right? As it relates to Christian history.
Sure. I mean, I guess I'm going to go for the 9.5 rather than full 10
Okay.
because there's a bit of legend around this, and the kind of, the guy marching up to the door with the hammer on the 31st of October. It probably didn't happen quite like that.
Right.
This is what historians always do. We're going along saying, no, 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 let's go to your myths. But I mean, what that represents,
Yes.
this moment, what is kick-started by what at the time seemed just like a kind of pretty ordinary thing for a guy in Martin Luther's position to do. It sets in motion something pretty big, which is still unfolding around the world today.
That's a great point. Well, give us some background on kind of what was going on. I know a lot was going on that was going on not only with Luther personally, but also in and around what was going on in that particular area of the Holy Roman Empire at that time, and what was going on in Germany, as we would call it, Germany.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, that's a big question, and the
Right.
problem is going to be how far you back up. So
Okay.
so we are at the end of what we now call the Middle Ages. They didn't know it was the Middle Ages, where you've got a Europe, Western Europe is pretty much united in its allegiance to the Catholic faith, the universal faith, as they call it, which is presided over by the papacy. The Institutionally, the Catholic Church is in a bit of a mess. The papacy's had a pretty bad 150 years for various reasons, and the men in charge of it in Rome in that generation are not particularly impressive guys.
Sure.
And so there's a real reputation for corruption around it, but there's a lot of energy for reform and renewal as well. Masses of these kinds of movements that are springing up, and the smart money is that there will be a wave of internal renewal and reform, because this is what has happened so often before. For 1,000 years, the church in Western Europe has gone through these kinds of cycles. One of the things that makes it different is that the world is much more open than it's ever been before. It used to be that when there was a debate in the church, it happened amongst a few people, most of the monks, or within universities. Now
Hmm.
the doors have been flung open a lot wider. More people are literate than ever before. You've got a lot of religious movements which are trying to include ordinary lay people. And I mean, crucially, 70 years before this, you've had the invention of the printing press.
Sure.
And so you've got, that's one of the things that's driving this rise in literacy, that you've got masses of more people who've got the access to reading and writing than before. So these debates that might once have been dealt with kind of privately in Latin between scholars, it's now taking place in public. And in the middle of all this, Martin Luther, who is a professor of biblical theology at a pretty obscure university, newly founded university in Eastern Germany, what we now call Eastern Germany. It's then in the electorate of Saxony.
Right.
Um, and he's also a member of a kind of reforming religious order, the Augustinian Friars, who are, one of the more energetic
Mm.
of the religious orders of the time. And he starts formulating a pretty radical new understanding of God's grace. I mean, of course, he doesn't think it's a new understanding. He believes that he has rediscovered the original, the authentic meaning, especially of Paul. He has immersed himself in the letter to the Romans and the letter to the Galatians, and those two above all, but a series of other New Testament texts, and has had this kind of profound, shattering experience of God's grace, of mercy, undeserved, unearned, and this
Sure.
sense that we're saved. The idea that we're saved by God's grace, that's uncontroversial. Pretty much everybody believes that. For Luther, what really turns his life upside down is his discovery, and it's something he discovers in his own life, that he is saved exclusively and entirely by God's grace, that there's nothing that he can do or needs to do that can in any way contribute to this. It's an experience of utter dependence, throwing himself onto God's mercy and knowing that his salvation is totally out of his own hands, and the sense of liberation that comes from that for him just seems to turn everything upside down. And so, I mean, this is a professor who has a religious breakthrough and a remarkable spiritual experience. Now, I mean, this kind of thing happens all the time, and it doesn't usually start a revolution and set the
Well, but
world.
he's in a setting, though, right? I mean, where he's able to have people like Melanchthon and others, people that he can bounce these things off of, that are peers that can have this dialogue. So he's not like just some guy out there herding sheep in the greater Black Forest somewhere that went, oh my heavens, I just started to read this stuff. This is fantastic. While that certainly may have happened in plenty of places that we may or may not know about, he was in a setting, though, where that could grow to doing something more than just having your own revelation. Is that a
It
fair way of saying it?
that's completely right. So he's in a position to talk about this stuff, and because he's not just your shepherd in the Black Forest, but he is a professor. He's a doctor of theology, which was quite a rare distinction in those days.
Mm,
I mean, he's already been recognized by the church, by the university, as a serious scholar, and so he is starting to explore this stuff with his friends, with his colleagues at the university. Luther is often gets seen as this kind of standalone hero. He's very much a man with a group of friends and colleagues around him. But even then, this kind of thing would normally stay within the walls of the university. And what kicks
mm.
it off is a fundraising drive being pushed by his local archbishop, who is a singularly corrupt guy. It's Luther doesn't even know at the time that the reason for he thinks that this is about raising funds to rebuild St. Peter's in Rome, which is what they
Right.
say it is. Luther doesn't know that all this is about the archbishop trying to pay off the debts that he has from the illegal bribes that he paid in order to get made archbishop.
Right.
Um,
Which
so
also he was an elector as well, right? I mean, didn't he
no,
get to
that's a different guy.
different guy? Okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
there's the archbishop is the real problem. The elector is the prince. Frederick, the Elector of Saxony. I mean, elector is a kind of weird title.
Right.
Basically, it means that the local ruler. And he's a friend of Luther's. He's. I don't think Elector Frederick ever really understood what Luther was on about or was that
Mm,
interested in it.
mm.
But Elector Frederick is the guy who founds Wittenberg University, and he suddenly he's got a celebrity professor on his staff, and he likes it.
Right.
So he just likes the way that this is drawing attention to
Right.
his new place, which is fair. Um, but so you've got this fundraising drive going on, and it is the principles of this are just so against what Luther has worked out in terms of his theology and ideas that he just I can't let this go. And so he produces this a public condemnation of it, and he does it in a really professory way. He produces this document which we call the 95 Theses. Um, a thesis for us sounds like a book, but these theses are like bullet points. They're just kind of 1 or 2 line statements, and it's basically kind of laying down, these are the core ideas that I've got on this subject. I'm developing some kind of points for discussion, and it's a challenge, it's an invitation to take part in an academic argument. And so it's written in Latin, very much the way that you would do this kind of thing. And it's possible that he posted them on the church door of the castle church in Wittenberg. The report we have of that he did that is like 20 years later.
But hadn't he done that type of thing before, though, right? I mean, that was not that unusual to say, hey, we're thinking about these things, using our modern maybe way of saying, hey, we're thinking about doing some of these things and kicking this stuff around. Here's something for folks if you want to learn about or know about. Come on down and come to the church and we'll kick these ideas. Or I'm being probably a little,
No, I mean, I think that's exactly right.
But it's not that unusual of a thing, right?
No, it would be like, writing a Substack or something. It's just a completely normal way of saying, okay, I want to have an argument about this.
Right.
Someone come and have a fight with me about it, which is why it's in Latin. It's, he's wanting to do it in the normal academic way by the rules. I mean, what he says is a bit inflammatory. That, when you read these things, you think, hang on a second, this is going beyond sort of normal academic disputation. He's saying you're trying to build this church out of the blood and bones of Christ's sheep, and you think, whoa, okay, that's quite strong. But hey, they like to robust debate in those days. And so maybe he posted it on the castle door, but he did 2 much more important things with it. One of them is he sent a copy to the archbishop, which was, that's provocative. But the other one is he sends a copy to the printer. He gets this thing printed up and circulated. And the printer, when it lands on his desk, he thinks this is pretty good copy. And it looks as if it's on the printer's own initiative. It's not Luther's idea that the printer decides to produce a German translation of it alongside. And so now suddenly it's out there in the open and people are picking this up. And, well, it all just rolls from there. What starts out as what should have been this invitation to a nice, civilized academic argument, pretty soon things have got way out of hand.
Well, we are enjoying our conversation here with Professor Alec Ryrie, and we're talking all about the 95 Theses, nailed or not nailed on the 31st of October of 1517. Regardless of that, the impact is certainly there in a big way from there. So I had always, in what bit of study I've done, was because he did put these theses in the bullet form, was it intentional to think that maybe people would pay more attention because it was in a bullet way, unless it was in a 5-paragraph thing or something that might be more difficult for people to have to go and read the whole thing? Here's just a few bullet points. I might be able to read it simpler and quicker that way. Was that intentional, do you think? Or did it just...
I think that's, I mean, it certainly has that effect. I don't think that's really what he's aiming at. It's just because that's the normal way that you would make an academic point like this, that you've got this your set of points to be discussed. The Dominican friars whom he's attacking, these are the guys running the fundraising scheme, immediately respond with 106 theses of their own. They've got to have more. And so, I mean, you could see that could just ramp up, that each time everybody comes back with another 10 and it gets kind of
who's
silly.
Posted what today, right?
Yeah. I mean, there really is that it's got that social media quality to it. But what he then comes back with is a defense of the 95 Theses, where rather than the original one, it's just a handful of pages. The defense is pretty short. But it's a little bit longer. It's a bit more in your paragraphs. But what he's doing is taking what are supposed to be learned theological disputes out into the open. He's doing it in front of the in front of the general public in a way that is kind of new, and that his opponents are really floored by. They're just not. This is
Mm.
breaking the rules for how this kind of discussion
You
is
talked out of
supposed to
school,
happen.
maybe in a way,
Yeah,
literally, right? But
yeah,
I mean,
yeah, yeah.
literally out of the
Literally.
school. But you're not supposed to talk about these things out there amongst everybody else. This is not.
Yeah, yeah. The common people don't, are supposed to kind of listen and obey and not
Mm.
read and take part. And
And think.
Luther is, and I mean, he's got his theological reasons for this. He's come to believe that the distinction between the priesthood and the common people, between the clergy and the laity, is imaginary. That he says that all Christians are truly priests. That if you're, as soon as you're baptized, you're a priest, and therefore that in that sense, all Christians' voices ought to be heard. He doesn't quite mean that as radically as it sounds, and he spends some of his later life trying to backpedal from the implications of it. But
Mm.
still, it's there. He means it. Um, and so he really does want to try and push this out there and bring a wider public into it. And he discovers, and I think it's pretty clear he didn't know this before, that he's a really good populist writer. He can write. I mean, especially when he's writing in his native German.
Mm.
He's got an ability to coin these really vivid, arresting phrases. I mean, I spend quite a lot of time reading some of Luther's texts with my students, and they're working through other texts from the same period, and they're very kind of learned and solid. And then you read Luther, and it's like this guy's come along and sort of grabbed you by the collar and is shouting into your face. I mean, you might like it, you might not, but you can't not pay attention to the guy.
Right.
And he is producing these pamphlets that they are selling like hotcakes in Germany. They're able to build up a mass market, and his conservative opponents, the institutionalists, are just left gasping. They you begin to see a few of them trying to compete in this, but it's like a kind of an old guy my age trying to do TikTok. It's just embarrassing when you watch them. You don't understand the genre, guys. Just don't
Don't
do
go
it.
there.
But then this whole thing blows up because, blows up even further because, as far as the institution is concerned, it's not just that they're bad at the genre, but that Luther has gone properly off the reservation. And they pretty quickly start saying, you are just not allowed to do this. And as a matter of obedience, you're a friar. You've taken a vow of obedience as part of your Christian formation. You've got to stop. The church regards this as a matter of discipline. And so you have this series of set piece debates that happened during 1518, 1519, 1520. I mean, we call them debates, but they're not really debates because the two sides are talking past each other.
Mm.
Luther basically shows up at these things saying, these are my theological ideas. This is my understanding of God's grace. And I'd love to talk about this and, explore these ideas with you. I think they're really exciting. And his opponents are saying, we're not going to talk about that. The only thing that we can talk about is, are you going to submit to the authority of the church before you begin? And Luther refuses to give an answer to that question. And so they have these series of just failed encounters where they are smacking up against each other. And the only result that they have is that Luther is able to use this time to really kind of develop and refine and work out what his ideas are under this kind of pressure. When you go back and read the 95 Theses, you can see that he's still kind of making this stuff up as he goes along. There's some inconsistencies there, things that later on he would say, no, I don't quite go with that. So it's got that sort of half-cooked quality to it. Whereas by 1519, we're pretty much there. He's basically sorted this stuff out, and that's the point when he's challenged. There's a particular debate that happens in the summer of 1519 in Leipzig, in what's now Eastern Germany, with a guy called Johann Eck, who's probably the most effective opponent Luther ever faces. And by this stage, Eck knows that there's no way he's going to persuade Luther to give in, because
Right.
you know,
The toothpaste is out of the tube by now, right? I mean, there's
well,
no.
I mean, he's just met the guy. Luther has, as well as discovering that he's a really good writer, he has discovered that he is one of the most stubborn people ever to have walked this earth. This guy is just is never going to give in.
Right.
And so Eck goes to this conference not really hoping that he's going to persuade Luther to give up, but that he is going to be able to out Luther as a serious heretic, and to get him openly to defy the authority of the church. And the way he does it, it's clever. He goes back to this guy named Jan Hus, who I don't know if he's featured on this week.
He's already been. We've already had him on as a previous episode. Yes.
Fantastic. Anyway, so Hus had been burned as a heretic just over 100 years earlier. He'd been condemned by the highest possible authority in the Western Church, by a general council of the church. Luther had up till now been saying, we need to have a general council to resolve these issues, because they'll take my side. And what this guy, Luther's opponent Johann Eck, does is sit down with what Luther had said and says, look, all of this is what Hus said. You're saying a whole load of things that he did, and he was condemned. And he was condemned by a council. He was condemned with the fullest authority of the church. So what do you say, Luther? And Luther kind of does the only thing he can, which is to say, well, if the whole church collectively is telling me that what I believe is wrong, well, then the whole church must be wrong, because I've read the text and I know what's true, and I've had this shattering encounter with grace in my own life. So authority of the church, tough. Which, I mean, this is the point where you get the sense, okay, we're no longer in a kind of moment of renewal, within the church. And he's almost throwing over the whole idea of the church as a divinely founded institution, rather than as a kind of invisible body, which is what Luther's followers and all most of the various Protestant churches since then have come to believe. And so the following year, Luther gets excommunicated by the Pope, and he responds not by kind of returning on his knees in penitence to the bosom of Mother Church, but by publicly burning the bull of excommunication and writing a book in which he says that the Pope is Antichrist. So things have kind of broken down by this point. And then the following year, he actually gets condemned as a heretic by the Holy Roman Emperor, by the Parliament of the Holy Roman Empire in the city of Worms. And so for the rest of his life, for the last last 25 years of his life, he's got a price in his head. That condemnation hangs over him. But by this stage, the base of support that he has built up, and especially that image of him standing alone at the Diet of Worms in April 1521, where he is, this sole figure, one monk, standing in front of all the assembled majesty of church and state in Germany, and saying, my conscience is captive to the word of God. I will not obey what you're saying and just knuckle under, unless you can show me from scripture that what I'm saying is false. And there are plenty of people there who are saying, this is nuts. This is one guy just refusing to accept the authority of the church. But to an awful lot of folks, it looks like this moment of heroism, of real courage. I mean, it is a moment of real courage. I mean,
sure.
Whether you agree with him or not, I don't think you can dispute that. And there's a bunch of other reasons why some folks are keen to get involved in this movement too. And so to cut a long and very complicated story short, but by the middle of the decade, by the middle of the 1520s, So this is what, 8 years or so after
Hmm.
the whole thing kicks off. You're starting to get significant blocks of the German lands actually peeling away from the authority of the old church, and setting up their own church structures, on what we now call Lutheran lines, a
Sure.
series of cities and territories. First of all in Germany, then the Scandinavian kingdoms, Denmark, Sweden, and then these ideas start spreading around and being picked up and taken in different directions elsewhere. So, and then within another generation or two, that's turned into nearly a century of really bloody religious wars, as the Catholic powers try to suppress these movements, and the territories that have turned into this new Protestant movement, as it starts to get called, are pushing back, and some of them trying to conquer and hold onto new territories.
Well, we
So
have a whole episode on the Peace of Westphalia. So, I mean, just understand that we've
yeah,
that's good stuff too, right? I mean,
it
be
it
able to
it
think about how.
it certainly is, but it all goes back to that moment in
Mm,
at the end of October, beginning of November 1517, when Luther, when he doesn't nail the theses to a wall, but when he puts them in an envelope, and sends them off to the printer and the archbishop. I know that's not such a good image, but
no, but it's impactful nonetheless. And it kind of what kind of makes me uh uh what kind of chews around in my brain a little bit is, I wonder, because as I've heard it kind of maybe simplistically said, and please tell me if you think this is, you use the term stubborn for Luther, but that he could be a jerk, right? I mean, if you got him up against the wall and he was feeling like he was the caged bear, right, or something, you got him in a corner. He wasn't just laying down and asking you to go away. He was, he was coming back at you pretty good. So you got to kind of wonder if the Dominican answer would have just been, whatever, leave the guy alone and just let him, rot into himself and think what he wants. But they moved it up a notch. Then they moved it up a notch. And then the next one moved it up a notch. And then now all of a sudden he looks around, all of a sudden, I don't mean it that way, but
yeah,
goes, gee whiz, look at all these other people that knew exactly who Jan Hus was. Look at all these other people that have been thinking the
yeah.
same thing that I've been thinking.
Mhm.
And now I'm maybe putting it to paper into an organized more thought maybe than they have had. But there are a whole lot of people that are buying what I'm selling, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in some ways the real mystery is not how Luther comes up with this position, but how it becomes so popular so quickly, how he's able to
Yeah, right.
catch the imagination. And there are particular ideas that he's got that really seem to land. So I mean, there's a nationalist element to this. He's able to portray it as this is about these shifty, effeminate, tricksy Italians, and they've been pulling the wool over the eyes of us bluff, honest Germans for a long time. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, and this idea of the universal priesthood, that everybody has this kind of equal spiritual worth, all Christians in God's eyes, people really like that.
Right.
But I mean, the core idea of justification by faith alone, or by grace alone through faith alone, is one that does seem to get out pretty widely. And I mean, the sense I have from reading some of this stuff is that no one else had put it quite that way before, but there's a lot of
Mhm.
people who, when they hear it, in that generation, in that moment, instead of thinking, that's an interesting new idea, they respond with, yeah, that kind of, I sort of already knew that. It
Uh,
feels instinctively right. It
uh,
crystallizes, gives voice to something, to sort of inchoate ideas which are out there. So I think that's one of the reasons why this is able to run away so quickly. And you've got, we said it already, but it bears repeating,
mm,
that it's not just Luther. I mean, he is this, really dominant, charismatic figure, especially in the first few years. but there's a bunch of other people, some of whom are clearly allied to him, some of whom are a bit more semi-detached,
Hmm.
who are developing these ideas in their own ways. I mean, his closest friend and ally is the professor of Greek at the same university, Philip Melanchthon,
Right.
who becomes
Who
a
we
full
have an
professor.
episode on. Okay.
Okay,
Right.
I mean, Melanchthon becomes a full professor when he's 21.
Yeah.
Luther clearly is always a bit in awe of him. Just recognizes that in terms of sheer academic ability, this guy is a notch or two above him. But and they're a really effective team.
Hmm.
But I mean, they're in terms of mood and temperament, they could hardly be more different. I mean, Luther's line about this is that Melanchthon pricks their enemies with needles, whereas Luther runs them through with a boar hunting pike. So, yeah, Melanchthon is always the kind of reasonable one who's wanting to kind of lower the temperature and have your kind of civil conversation, while Luther has kind of turned purple and his eyes are bugging out as he shouts in your face. So, I mean, it's one of the reasons why they make a good team.
No doubt, no doubt. And so I mean, the thing that impresses me about part of this is that as people, not only as you're saying that it's like he threw the match on the gasoline that was already bubbling, right? In some kind of a way. I mean, there were pieces of that, and then it really got uh, 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 how that was able to take it. But for Luther to be able to say, these are the things that I believe, and I'm taking these from Scripture, and you too have a copy of Scripture, and go read it yourself. All right. If you don't think it's, I mean, you don't have to agree with me, but you need to see where I'm coming from. And where I'm coming from are these pages that are the Bible. And so this is not just some guy hanging out at a very, obscure university that's having university conversation with somebody. It seems like that empowerment, if you will, of the individual to be able to go, I'm tracking what you're putting down and I'm getting this and I see where you're coming from, really was a huge part of the impact for all that.
I think that's clearly the case. That's a really powerful, really appealing idea in itself. He's not just selling all these books to people. He's saying you matter, and you are Christians of the same worth as anybody else, and have just as much right to discern God's truth as the Pope himself. That line that he adopts at his condemnation at Worms, when he says, I will recant if you can prove to me from Scripture that I'm wrong.
Right.
Um, that's one that really seems to catch fire when there's a big peasant rebellion in Germany of just 3-4 years later, which is all kind of caught up in this movement.
Right.
And the peasants issue this list of demands. And at the end of it, they say, I mean, it's almost a direct quote. They say, and if you can show to us from Scripture that we're wrong, then we'll change our minds. And I mean, this is not what Luther was trying to do.
Right.
And he spends a lot of his time in the for the rest of his career trying to say, hang on a minute, people, when I said that we're all equal before God, I didn't mean that you could all just run off in every direction. And he is horrified by some of the more kind of radical stuff, both in terms of social policy, but also in theology, that people are coming out with. So there's a whole lot of like, no, I didn't mean that. Obviously when I said that you're free and equal before God, I meant you're free and equal to understand the truth as I'm telling you that it is. But he's let the cat out of the bag.
Right.
And it's been a feature of the Protestant churches ever since, that Protestants like nothing more than arguing with each other. And in the Catholic Church, you've got a nice structure and a hierarchy.
It's a lot
and
cleaner,
a
isn't it? It's a lot easier.
You can say, yeah, you're allowed to say this, you're not allowed to say that. Right. And Protestants from the beginning have thrown out that whole thing. So I mean, the story of Protestant history ever since then has been just one long, continuous, rolling argument. And I mean, if you're a Protestant like me, then you think that's great. I love it.
Right, right. Well, one last thing, but since we are focusing on this day that had he actually done it or not. We won't argue. We won't arm wrestle on that. But because
I'm
I
so
don't know
sorry.
enough to arm wrestle one way or the other. So but the idea of it being on, on the 31st of October, where there would have been more people paying attention, maybe because it was All Hallows Eve. I mean, was there anything strategic you think about that particular date if it would have happened, or it just kind of worked out that way?
No, I think it's just a coincidence.
I got you.
That's it's one of those things like the 4th of July ends up being the celebration date for the US Declaration of Independence, even though
Right.
that the actual vote happened the day before and they send it out
Right.
the day afterwards, and so it's just
Right.
the day it happens to land in the middle.
It's the day that's on the document, right? It's not the day the
It's
vote happened, and the vote didn't go the way they wanted it to the first go round. That's why they were waiting for this vote to be right. All right.
Exactly. It's that kind of thing.
Right. Right.
But I mean, call it coincidence or providence. It does mean that if you're somebody who doesn't like Halloween, then you've got a terrific alternative celebration on the 31st of October.
That's exactly right. Exactly right. And this is fascinating stuff and great conversation. And thank you for your time today. We really appreciate very much being able to learn more and to be able to ponder on even more things, which is why we do this podcast. And this is part of why we have the Center for Christian History. That is that we want to be able to throw these things around and make sure that people are hearing all pieces and parts of that. So, Professor Ryrie, thank you for your time today. We appreciate it.
Great pleasure to be with you. Thanks a lot.
Well, I'm going to stop it when I can figure out how to stop it. Oh, there it is. Okay. I don't have my glasses on. That's